So today we're going to be talking about the primaries from last night and what it means for both political parties. So of course we had the primaries from the states of Pennsylvania, Oregon, Idaho, and Nebraska. And we're going to go through with them, compare it to some opinion polling and the candidates' popularity, and see how this primary could these primaries in general will suggest implications for the 2018 midterms. So pretty much after every primary night, I'm not going to cover it unless I have a lot of time on my hands, but typically it's not that important of a night where very few races are actually going to be of the utmost importance when it comes to 2018 and in talking about determining the balance of power. I'm probably not going to do a live stream on it. I'll probably just do a video like this one after every primary and see how the either Democratic or Republican Party progresses or degresses in terms of political candidates. So last week I said that the primaries turned out to be good news for Republicans, nominating people that can actually win, challenging incumbents where it can strengthen them. And now we're going to be talking about what these primaries mean for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But first of all, we're going to start off in the state of Pennsylvania. So this one is going to be more watched than any other state that had a primary last night. So Bob Casey, a United States Senator, uncontested in the Democratic primary, along with the incumbent governor, Tom Wolf. Also, both of these races are not safe for either candidate. I can't say it wasn't expected that Scott Wagner would win it was unexpected that Scott Wagner would win the GOP nomination. Pretty much everyone thought he would, based off opinion polling of the primary and just in general, his base. I mean, he didn't win by the margin that I thought he would. I thought he would win over 50%, but clearly he's still the winner. And when we go up to Lou Barletta, I can't say that one wasn't expected either. Almost all opinion polling was done between Lou Barletta and Bob Casey. They didn't really have an idea of a Jim Christiana victory for the GOP, and rightfully so. Pretty much, if you look at this county map, we see that the centralized areas aren't agreeing on a couple things. So places like Allentown voted for Lou Barletta. Then you go over to Philadelphia, and they voted for Lou Barletta. Keep in mind the Republican Party. Then you go to Erie, it's not really that. It's not as important as a Philadelphia might be for a candidate, but Erie County is closely watched in presidential elections, and it's going to be watched in this 2018. Senate election and governor election, because it is a swing county. Went to Jim Christiana, and also Allegheny, the county with Pittsburgh, Allegheny County went to Jim Christiana, not by the margins that Allentown, Lay County, and Philadelphia County did, but it's still just important to know that not all the population centers are necessarily agreeing. We can definitely see how Lou Barletta appealed to the more eastern side of the state compared to the western part, where he didn't have as strong of a hold on to it. But regardless, he won in a landslide victory with 63.1% of the vote. So overall, the Pennsylvania primary isn't good news or bad news for the Republicans. They're at the exact same standing as to where they were before. And the fact that Bob Casey had no Democratic opponent, neither did Tom Wolf, means that he won't lose any voters when it comes to the Democratic primary, but it also means he probably won't gain any coming out of the primary. Usually, if a candidate is an incumbent and they're contested, they change a few things, which could typically possibly help them gain a couple of voters. I think this primary, both candidates are pretty much unfazed on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, it's pretty consistent. So if we look at the opinion polling for the Senate race, Bob Casey is probably easily going to carry this race. Against Lou Barletta, he's not even polling. Lou Barletta, in this case, is barely polling about 40% in one poll, and the rest show him under 40%. Not good news for Lou Barletta or the Republicans in general. Same thing in the Pennsylvania governor election. Tom Wolf is consistently polling ahead of all other GOP candidates, and clearly we've narrowed down to Scott Wagner tonight. But yeah, so Scott Wagner, presumably the nominee before yesterday, and of course, proclaimed the nominee last night. So not good or bad news for each political party. But Oregon, pretty interesting. Oregon, Kate Brown, the incumbent, had a little bit of opposition, but obviously she won by a considerable margin with 82.7% of the vote, compared to Newt Bueller, who won his primary with 46.5% of the vote. In the areas of the more Republican districts that aren't urbanized, that are more rural, Sam Carpenter definitely did a lot better. And we're talking about that one district in the state that has a Republican incumbent, which is out here, leaning towards the east of this eastern state, the eastern part of Oregon, whereas the more centralized area, more urban type GOP voters typically go for someone like Newt Bueller, just based off policy and just the fact that Sam Carpenter definitely had a much better outreach when it comes to these type of candidates. But yeah, so again, this probably brings good news to the GOP. Newt Bueller is probably one of the few GOP candidates who could be even possible could have a possibility at winning. Clearly, the Democrats are probably going to hold on to this state. It's a state like Oregon, but this puts their standings a little bit better. Clearly not in the favor, but for the Republicans, they have a little bit more of a shot than if they had someone like Sam Carpenter, who could literally only appeal to that one district, or Greg Wooldridge. But yeah, so not much to talk about when we're talking about the House districts. Let me turn off my volume. When we're talking about the House districts, not that much of importance when we go all the way down. Actually, no, not all the way down to the 2nd district. Incumbent GOP representative. The GOP primary, of course, got more votes than the Democratic one, but it's pretty much consistent on how the parties have been and how they vote in typical elections. So District 4 could become a little bit more contested with extended GOP turnout compared to Democratic turnout. Same thing with District 5, but regardless, they're probably going to stay with the Democrats. So let's look at some opinion polling. Newt Bueller actually polling ahead of Kate Brown in a Republican-done poll, but still it's a poll nonetheless, compared to Kate Brown pretty much winning in all the other polls. So this race could become close. Probably won't. This is probably just an outlier, but pretty interesting to see a GP candidate ahead in a state like Oregon. So now we're at the United States Senate race for the state of Nebraska. Not much to talk about for the governor's race. Probably going to stay with the GOP. But I'm going to talk about the Senate race because it's not contested whatsoever. But it's pretty interesting to talk about. Deb Fischer, the incumbent senator, didn't win 24% of the vote that went to other candidates. And she didn't receive firm opposition, but clearly there are some GOP. They aren't so keen as to jumping on the ticket, as you might think. And I'm pretty sure that the Senate race will stay with the GOP. I really don't see any possibility of a Democratic pickup here. With Jane Raybould, probably one of the better choices for the Democrats, but clearly it was a landslide. And let's look at some opinion polling between the Democrats and the Republicans. The generic Republican poll shows Deb Fischer had a little less standing than the one-on-one polls, but Jay Raybould carries 34% of the poll. 34% of the vote in a poll done between Deb Fischer and them, and 51% for Deb Fischer, 34% for Jay Raybould. Pretty much probably going to go to Deb Fischer. And the final primary we're going to talk about is the state of Idaho. The governor's race here. So we have a Native American in the governor position for the Democrats, which is pretty interesting. One of the first times happening. But this is where I think the GOP suffered a loss. They have the incumbent lieutenant governor who was running in the GOP primary, who won, and they had one out of their 2 representatives run in the Republican primary. So Brad Little, the incumbent lieutenant governor against Raul Labrador, who is the representative from the 1st district. You know, that's not necessarily the best for the Idaho GOP. They're clearly going to win this race. However, I think Labrador might have been a better candidate, considering he would bring different type of change. He wouldn't be so closely tied to the administration. But, you know, this one will still be a good thing for the GOP nonetheless. But I still think Labrador could have been that one person that could have won by an even larger margin than what Brad Little might. So actually, I don't think there's any polling just yet, but or will there ever be? But so solid R, rated by almost all political pollsters as a solid race between Paulette Jordan and Brad Little. Pretty much the primary between all the candidates on the Democratic side. Not really consistent throughout this state, but still, I would still believe they're going to rally behind whatever Democrat they have. And Brad Little clearly going to win the GOP a race here in the state of Idaho. So thank you guys for watching this video. Overall, just to recap, in general, the GOP probably came out a little bit better than they could have in certain states, and then in other states they really they didn't mess up, but they could have had better candidates. Overall, in general, I think the general feeling is for the both political parties is unfazed. I mean, you can't say most of this wasn't expected, except for a couple races that aren't even as important as like the Pennsylvania Senate race. So overall, I don't think either party really benefits out of yesterday's primaries. Turnout numbers were about the same, and it wasn't you know, consistent throughout political parties, which I think could bring some variation to the candidates. But, you know, in general, this is probably not going to phase either political party compared to last week when there was actually someone who was important enough to stop from the GOP side. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below. I'll probably do another video just a tad bit later. Actually, not a tad bit later, probably a couple hours later. But again, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you all tomorrow.